Excellent. Hello, everyone. I hope you've been having a fun day so far. Welcome to the final session of the day, the second plenary session, which will be a little old cracker indeed. So, having to moderate this session, we'll be driving it with the firm hand of Grand Dame of Arts Criticism and Writing, Helen Musa. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Alan. Now, if Alan had done his job properly and introduced me correctly, as I had instructed him, he would have told you that when I was very young, before I had any thought of becoming an arts critic, I was a stage manager in opera and dance in Sydney. And this means that I can run a pretty tight ship. And we know that Professor David Williams is going to do a little bit of a mini summary at the end of the afternoon. So we are going to wind up in about 35 minutes. What we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to our speakers and I'm going to try and get their titles right because, as we discovered this afternoon, it's very important to know the difference between a CEO and an artistic director and a general manager. So I'll do my best, and each of them will speak for about 5 minutes. And what we're looking at is a very simple question, is pretty much, how do you get people to work for you in the arts? And we mean good people. Are you going to be attracting people for the love or for the money? Well, you know that it's not the latter, don't you? But what we think is that perhaps the love that goes into applying for an arts appointment somewhat compensates. I've never been able to figure it out, but probably you could put a figure of about 45 or 50,000 a year on the love, because there won't be much more than that in the money. Having said this, I have been noticing that if you're looking for jobs in the arts, it's amazing how often you see arts organisations in the ACT advertising for various people to fulfil functions within their organisation. Perhaps that's a regular thing, perhaps they're a key organisation that gets regular funding. Perhaps they've just got some temporary funding in order to beef the organisation up. But it is quite frequently that you'll see jobs advertised in the daily press and elsewhere within the arts. And I want to know from our panellists today how you get people, what you're looking for, what their views are about arts staff. And also, we might consider things like whether you're going to be able to attract people from interstate to Canberra. That would be a factor. Or aren't we offering enough money, or aren't we offering enough attraction? So to kick off, I'm going to invite Daniel Ballantyne, who's on my far right, who is the CEO of Belconnen Arts Centre, but who has a very exotic background in the arts that began in Adelaide many years ago and has traversed work with local government entities in Newcastle. And when it comes to that, he knows where most of the bodies are buried. But I guess that's not what he's going to talk about this afternoon. So I will invite Daniel to speak to us for several minutes and his perspective to do with arts and staff.
Well, what I think I'm going to talk about actually is a false dichotomy and the responsibility of an employer to actually fight for good conditions and pay in the arts. I actually think that we all know that it's purpose and love and motivation that gets us into working in an arts and cultural environment. And there's a lot of information around to see that. We know what our friends are doing. We know what we want to do. But it's also increasingly clear that you've got to have a purpose, and that we're very lucky when we work in arts and culture that we can find that purpose, and that's a precious thing, and that motivates us greatly. But so it's not really about a question about love, it's actually about money and justice. And I've known that people pursue a work and culture as a vocation, and there's very few areas or fields that you can really be in a vocation. By a vocation I mean a sort of a life or a professional commitment that goes beyond, and that's why we're here. You know, there's the military, maybe medicine. You know, there's a lot of people that choose a vocation. So there's no question that you're going to be in it for the love. But we've got a problem in our sector, and that is that it's underpaid. And there's a couple of things I'd like to suggest that we can do. I think that, collective action is fundamental. Unions are part of it. it involves, as a manager, working towards conditions that stop creating false competition amongst arts organisations and funding bodies. We've got to look at the institutional and the culture and the sort of the factors that are around us and stop pretending that we're in markets. A big target's got to be the funding models. OSCO's introduced some reforms recently, and I think they're trying to add security to arts companies by having 6-year funding cycles and also making funding more accessible. I think that the arts actually belong in the public sector. I think that the arts should reflect public sector ethos and conditions. I don't think that the arts have to be supported always corporately. And I know that's what we're hearing a lot tonight. We've been talking about philanthropy and corporate support. That's very important. But I actually think that in terms of working in the arts, that we should be aiming for good conditions. And this is also important for the people that do work alone. And there's, the visual and the literary arts people do work alone. But if the sector broadly and culture is respected and it's properly funded, they'll benefit too, because they'll get rates of pay or grants and support that is commensurate to the respect that they deserve. So I've got 3 fairly simple things I think that should be done, that as arts leaders we should all be working for. And that's working hard in your own organisation to do the best you can, to give it purpose. Study leadership yourself, like we've been doing today. Fight for your colleagues' rights to be remunerated fairly. Set expectations around that are proper and realistic. Leaders can only really hope to do a few things well, and that's one of the things that a leader should be doing in all their organisations. And I think we've talked about that, others have too. I think we should be working towards creating larger and more impactful arts organisations. I think they should be regionally based or art form based and far more broader. They'll provide better employment opportunities, including pay. They can give conditions where people can thrive. And I find that arts organisations, they start up, they close down, they have jobs that go on short-term contracts. How many part-time jobs are there? There's heaps of part-time jobs. I don't think that's right. We've got to find a collective way of advancing the sector and realising that creating larger, more powerful organisations is a way of advancing the sector. Break down silos, create partnerships, that's fine, but I think they're stepping stones to creating stronger and more powerful institutions that are going to look after people that are doing the hard stuff. And just to the third point, if you're not a member of a union, I suggest you join. That's a legitimate collective way of improving pay and conditions in the arts. There's plenty of love around. It's really about what we deserve. Thank you.
And as a member of that union, I think that Daniel is talking about the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, and I dare say there are some visual arts equivalents, but they wouldn't have quite the same muscle.
They should get organised.
Yes, that's right. Okay, now we're actually going at this alphabetically this afternoon, so now I'm going to turn to Julie Dyson, who has been a powerful arts advocate for as long as I can remember here in Canberra, particularly in the dance sector, and who was notably the National Director of AusDance National for many years until her retirement. She is a member of the Childers Group, which shows you that she still is an advocate and an activist within the arts, and I'd like to hand over to you, Julie. Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. Yes, I often ask the question, what is retirement? So I don't really know about that yet. I agree with the things that Daniel said. We need to get organised. We need more structured advocacy, I guess, on behalf of our workers. But I wanted to hone in a little bit more on what it is that makes our work unique. We have two public services in this city. We have a lot of competition in terms of pay and conditions, and it's very difficult to attract staff, but it's also incumbent on us to try to keep those staff once we've got them. So it's not just about attracting. I think it's about ways in which we can keep the staff. So I think some of the characteristics that make our sector really interesting to workers is that we have real independence and opportunities for creativity, vision and imagination. I mean, having worked in several public sectors, I know that sometimes those things you can't always bring to fruition some of the big ideas and great thoughts that you have. And I found in the arts sector and in my organisation, I had the freedom to think about what makes our art form tick. What is it that we need to do? What are the things we need to change? Where are the gaps? And then the freedom, if you like, to try and pursue ideas, partnerships and networking to make those things a reality. So I think that freedom, that independence in our sector is a very important factor in attracting staff. So also the ability to scan the environment and to work out where the changes need to be, spot potential partners and bring the staff along with you to make them really feel part of the big ideas. But I think we also need to recognise that they have big ideas and that we need to work with them to work out where their skills are, what interests them, where their ideas come from, how we can work together to make, as a team, the next project very successful. I think the staff needs leadership rather than direction, and being a director is not the same as being a leader, and we've heard that several times today. We need to put time into building those relationships with staff and make sure that they understand what it is your vision is and how they can contribute to that in a very meaningful way. So I think then that means developing their skills, encouraging ideas, taking an interest in their work. I mean, these things go without saying really, but on the other hand, if we want to keep staff, we do need to work very hard at these issues. We need to create a culture of inclusiveness, especially with a small team. And I've only ever worked with small teams prior to my time at the ABC and the parliamentary reporting staff, where they were very big teams, very different. And I think we need to be inclusive with information. So we spend a lot of time out of the office. I think David talked about that earlier, that we need to get out a lot. We need to meet with other people. We need to build our networks. But we need to help our staff, the ones who are left behind, understand what it is we've been doing, how it is they can contribute to the ideas that we picked up along the way. So, and the last thing is providing professional development opportunities for the staff. So we're building their skills all the time. We're not leaving them to do the hack work. We're actually developing them as people and as workers with us. And finally, I really liked Harriet's comment earlier today where she said, make the staff successful. If they don't succeed, then I don't succeed. And I think that's really where my focus has always been, to try and make the staff as successful as the person who is leading them. So that's all I want to say right now. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Julie. And fear not, we'll come back and question her a little bit more closely later. Moving on, alphabetically, we come to Joseph Falsone, and I'm going to be sure to get this right, who is the Director of Gorman and Ainslie Arts Centres. We could probably talk for quite a while on the subtle differences between being a director and being a CEO, but it has been hinted at earlier in the day. Joseph actually has a very, if you have a look at his background, you'll see that he has a very broad aesthetic entree into the arts, although he's been working with arts organisations in Canberra for a long time now, notably with M16 and, of course, now with Ainslie and Gorman, which are going through change. Joseph, your perspective.
Thank you, Helen. And Helen's very kindly distracted you, or you can read about me while I'm talking and take your attention away. A few personal observations, I suppose, and then I think drawing together some of the strands from today in thinking what does leadership mean in the context of a team and working with employees. First of all, I started with this question of love or money, and I thought, well, I've worked for both. I've been fortunate enough to encounter love through meeting a work colleague in the past, and I did the scary exercise of actually counting up how much money I would have earned if I'd stayed in the corporate job I was in the last 10 years. And then I looked over at Jan and thought, well, I'll leave that aside. I'm also conscious that today there are at least half a dozen of the member organisations of Ainslie and Gorman Arts Centres here, and as members, in a sense, they're, in a roundabout way, they're my employers, so I'll be careful what I say about my own employment. I think the first observation is a question about meaning and values, and this has come up several times today. I heard someone say once that one surefire way to crush a person is to give them an utterly useless task and make them do it over and over again, which for some is a definition of... Sorry?
The myth of Sisyphus.
The myth of Sisyphus, and many people experience their daily work in that way. Thinking of your work as a joyful endeavour, an activity that actually is a space in which you achieve a sense of flow, a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. And I think working in the arts is one of those careers where we can actually find that, and that's one of the blessings of working in the arts. It's also one of the challenges for arts leaders. And I think this is the first of the four things which I'd point to as, what arts leadership is about, not only externally, but also with your own team. And the first is really representing the story of your organisation, inside and out, so that you're out there, advocating, you're talking to your sponsors, you're talking with your funding bodies, with audiences, with media, and then you come back into the office and say, bloody hell, the people who are working with you closely in that team are invested in it. They're your first and perhaps most important stakeholders, because without them you can't get the job done. So being able to represent the story and articulate it with them, but also go on a journey creating the story with them. And I think a lot of the people, when you ask them, why are you working, we did an exercise in our own team. We sat around and we talked about, we've got a purpose for the organisation, we've just written a business plan, but what's your purpose? If you define your role, what is it? Now, we've got a caretaker who, he does the menial task, cleans the bathrooms, clips the hedges and mows the grass. His parents actually lived at Gorman House when they first moved to Canberra. And so for him, when he came to the job, there was this personal connection that we didn't know about at first. But, we said, what do you do? And he said, well, I actually am really proud of my title, caretaker, and I take care not only of the visible things, but the invisible things. And here's someone who we might in an organisation just think, he sweeps up, that's, good on him. But he's so passionate about the organisation and what we're doing that on a summer's day, he'll take around, people will come up to me and say, thank you very much for the ice blocks. And I say, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're welcome. And sure enough, Greg has actually been out there with a box of icy poles, which he's gone and purchased himself, and he's wandering around to every one of the studio doors and the offices and handing out icy poles. And I said, that is the best PR stroke, for morale here. And that's an example of someone actually saying, as the person who sweeps up, I'm also representing and taking care of the story of the organisation, believing in it, and taking care not just of the tangible but of the intangible as well. And I think that exercise, asking what is your purpose here, it can be surprising. We know what the job description is, but when people say, I'm the link between the person with the problem and the solution, or I'm the custodian of artistic integrity for the organisation, when you hear your staff talking in those terms, you realise that that representing their personal story inside the organisation is essential. The second point, now this has been said a couple of times and it was introduced by Harriet, Julie's just mentioned it again, but this would be creating context for others to give their best. And that's about saying the environment. Now that partly is, are they properly remunerated? Can they afford to work for you? Have they got the right resources that they need? Do they have the confidence and courage to actually, and trust that you're giving them to actually go out and give their best? And that partly is understanding what is the capacity and the potential of this person, and that takes listening and empathy, and it also takes understanding, what is their motivation, what is their personal style of viewing the world and communicating, because in a diverse and a strong team you have many and equally valid ways of communicating and thinking about the world. The third one, and we've touched on this a lot today, we've talked about entrepreneurship, but I think it's ethical entrepreneurship. And that's the ability to create value for an organisation and to see those opportunities that might be out there to create profit for an organisation, but to do that in a way that is ethical. And I think people working in the arts, because of their arts practice and what they believe in, integrity is one of the most important qualities. And when you can look around a team and say the one thing, despite the diversity, that really unites the people here is a strong sense of personal integrity, then I think you're a long way towards a team that's going to achieve its full potential and do the best for an organisation. So in a sense, you're selling a lot, but you're also selling integrity, and that's fundamental internally, and the way you deal with your staff, communicates that as well. And then I think the other one is relationships of trust with stakeholders. Often we focus on our relationship with the board, we focus on our relationship with members, sponsors and so on, but what is the relationship of the organisation to its its staff, and is that a relationship of trust as well? So they're four things that actually there's someone in Canberra, Shireen Suki, whom some of you might know, who's actually did a PhD where she interviewed around 70 leaders of arts institutions and trying to pin down what are some of the characteristics that characterise leading with passion. So that's a short contribution, and I think I'm about to be donged. So
Yes, I think so. Yes, thank you, thank you very much,
Thanks.
Joseph. Now, moving on alphabetically, we have Rosanna Stevens, who is here described as a co-producer and founder of Scissors, Paper and Pen, which is a writing collective. But you couldn't have a better person to talk about staffing in the arts, because within living memory, Rosie has also worked for at least 2 arts organisations that I know of, one of which being yours, I think, for a time.
For the
No,
ACT
no,
Writers
no,
Centre,
no,
so one of our
within
members,
one
yeah.
of your member organisations, ACT Writers, and then Craft ACT for a short time as well, I think. So Rosie's seeing it from both sides, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. I am here with a little bit of an agenda. And firstly, I think it's really important that when we talk about attracting art staff for love or money, particularly in the ACT, and I am going to be focusing on the ACT, we're dealing with a famously transient population. And within that, we're also dealing with young people and emerging artists and practitioners coming and going at a really high rate. And so often an organisation will attract some new young staff members and won't know whether or not to invest in them, because they could well leave to, I don't know, Melbourne to do something extraordinary as well. What I really would love to talk about is young arts leaders in the ACT, because we actually have a veritable trove of them. The interesting thing about them is, although some of them work with organisations like CYT or QL2, we also have a formidable number of self-made leaders, and it is a truly unique gift that we have. An example of some of these kind of homegrown leaders are the people who put together things like In Canberra Tonight, Raw Canberra, Nomad Percussion, Bad Slam No Biscuit, Rip Publishing, Lip Magazine, Feminazi Journal, Scissors Paper Pen. The list goes on, and I know that I largely mentioned literary ones because that's my field. But what I mean to say is that the truly wonderful thing about these people is that they do what they do in such an unaffected way that they learn how to lead by just leading. And they learn leadership by testing things out and experimenting and adding an element to play to their organisations, because the only person they're answerable to is an audience and themselves. In light of that, I feel like there is a big gap between what these young people can offer themselves, or what I can offer myself, and what institutions should be offering these young people. I think that there are lots of strategies that could include young and emerging arts leaders into these more institutionalised environments, and they could mean really exciting things for Canberra. And I have 2 really exciting things that I think could happen. The first one is a reinvigorated interest in more developed arts institutes and practices from younger and inevitably one day majority population, middle class income earning local audiences. And the second one is the potential realisation of Canberra institutes as hothouses for innovative leadership practices. But I think before institutions can begin to look at, and I swear I'll be done in like 2 minutes, the things that the Canberra institutes need to look at firstly are what young leaders are already doing. And 2 of the things that young leaders are already doing are they are illustrating what arts leadership is going to look like in 10 years, because they are kind of already articulating what the arts are going to look like in 10 years. And when I say this, I mean YouTube, video, Vines, Twitter, online orchestras, hypertext poems, slam and digital writers' festivals are all part of the new arts landscape. And the people playing and experimenting with these forms are people who are unafraid to do it because it's fun and interesting and it's a fledgling cultural economy. But on top of all of this, young arts leaders, when we're talking about people, doing things for love or money, most of them are doing it for free. And I think that it's time for some of these young arts leaders to be welcomed into these larger institutions, and for these larger institutions to employ really interesting, innovative, welcoming, passionate pedagogies and begin to develop programs, simple programs, small internships, interdisciplinary programs, to begin to incorporate and approach these organisations, approach these smaller arts leaders, and not even necessarily take them on board in a way that obliges that organisation hugely, but in a way where that young person can begin to feel empowered as a leader by being able to take risks for that organisation, by experimenting for that organisation, by delivering really interesting outcomes as an intern, as somebody who is being mentored, or in the case of the Canberra Zine Emporium and MOAD's recent collaboration, producing really unique work as a collaborative kind of thing. On top of all of this, though, I would also like to say, and also if you really want to talk to me about this more, I would be super keen to chat to people who are interested in doing it. But on top of all of this, I would really like to say that I think there is an outstanding example of Canberra institutions kind of creating a space for interesting emerging leadership, and that is Canberra Centenary's use of You Are Here Festival, which developed not only fascinating leaders who were able to completely play with the emerging arts scene, it also meant that we were able to develop a really wonderful way of creating an imaginative community with incredible artistic outcomes. I think I'll leave it at that. That's it.
Thank you, Rosie. Now, Rosie, of course, she warned us that she had an agenda, and it wasn't strictly speaking to do with art staff, because she was talking about people who most definitely do things because of their passion on the whole. Now, I'm going to have to be a little bit leaden-footed and bring it back, because we only have about 10 minutes to wind this up, and I wanted to bring it back to arts staff and arts staffing. I noted that Harriet Elvin said earlier in the day that many of the people who worked for her had their own arts practice. Now, I have a little bit of a fantasy, which is that the arts generally is still about the only sector where if you really want to work in it, you can, and you don't have to have a PhD in it. This might not be so if you went to Shane Brainard and put yourself up as a senior curator or something. He might demand something from you there, but I certainly know when I was a young stage manager, you could go to the Opera House and knock on the stage door, and if you were cunning enough, you could get a job, and then you joined the union.
Things have changed, Helen.
Yes, I know. But then you joined the union and you made sure that you... Yeah, that's right. However, things may have changed, but I'd like to ask those of you who are in an employer situation, what you would, in terms of, I know, Daniel, that you have people there who have their own independent arts practice, but it isn't necessarily to do with the job that they're doing. Could you speak to that?
Oh, look, people should be encouraged to develop and grow however they like. Bringing an arts practice to a job can be a good thing or it can be a complicated thing. We talked about conflict of interest earlier. It's not a big issue in our organisation, and it shouldn't be. But certainly, I think that there are levels in organisations which are there to support and deliver venues, facilities, services to artists, and an arts practice is a good thing to the extent that they're empathetic to that, but it's not essential. It's about having the skills and the nous and the drive, the organisation, and a view about how things run.
Yeah. Joseph?
I think when we've had people currently and in the past working in our organisation that also have arts practices, I think when you're recruiting, there's really three things that you're looking for, and an arts practice can help or hinder with those. One is values, and obviously people who are working in an arts organisation that understand the arts, there's a high degree of fit there. The other is competency. In some roles, having a good understanding of the arts, especially the programming roles, is really important, and so, your competency is important. In other roles where you need administrative or other technical skills, being an artist and loving the organisation obviously is not enough. And the other one is career fit, and this is where I think, if you are employing people who have serious arts careers, then I think the degree of flexibility that an organisation can afford at any time to support people in doing that. I think it's one thing you can offer in an arts organisation is a degree of flexibility, but at the same time, there's the potential for those two parallel careers to to collide or to take resources from each other. So I think those three things, regardless of someone having an arts practice or not, are the things you're looking for when you're trying to recruit, and an arts practice can help or hinder depending on the circumstances and the person.
Yeah. And I can see Caroline Stacey right up the back of the room there, and I've noticed that she employs a great number of people. In fact, I'd be hard put to identify any of the people working with her who didn't have some kind of arts practice or arts connection. And I imagine that she also would support that comment about empathy. I'll just ask one more question, then I'll take one or two questions, and then we have to wind up and hear from Professor David Williams. And I think I'll direct this one to Daniel, I think, because he's an out-of-towner. Well, give him another year or so and we'll accept him as a local.
Please.
But I'm just wondering, they often say that it's a dreadful thing to come to Canberra, whether in the arts or in any other capacity as an out-of-towner, because you are shunned as an outsider and an interloper and all of that. I'm looking at a couple of other interlopers out there who seem to have done quite well over recent years too. Did you have any feeling about that at all?
You don't know how lucky you are in Canberra. The reality is, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who know this, I shouldn't be telling you how to suck eggs.
But did you know it? Did you know it before you got
I
here?
had a pretty good idea that the scene was very strong here. I've been to Canberra many times before coming here to live this time. I'd come from a city which was actively winding down its cultural program, and one of the reasons I chose to leave as a professional was that there was no opportunity there. Those environments are dreadful. But no, Canberra is a great place. It's very supportive. You've got to make up your mind to go and see as many things as you can in a shorter period as possible to get around the joint. And I was lucky as an unattached but married man to be able to do that in the first 6 months. I've slowed down a little bit, but
That's
no.
because his wife and child came to Canberra,
Yeah.
so he's no longer footloose and fancy-free.
I am a ballet taxi. Yes, but no, it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take a couple of questions from the House before we wind up. No. Yes. Helen?
General question, not regarding
No, not at this stage. I think perhaps Professor Williams might be prepared to take that. I'd rather that it's linked directly to the question of staff. Yeah. There we are. Yes. Oh, and would you like to tell us who you are too, please? Advice for out-of-towners. A couple of top tips.
It gets better.
Rosie?
I think a couple of things. Firstly, go to some stuff, go to some local stuff, because there's a huge difference between the kind of more federal level arts in Canberra, which is beautiful and wonderful, and the local art. Head over to Gorman House and look at their program. And the other thing is, just own being a Canberran. Most people don't know this, but I came to Canberra pretty much to start scissors, paper, pen, and I just told people I was from Canberra. I'm from the Blue Mountains, but people think I'm from Canberra. Just do that. They love it. Yeah.
Yes, I think that I might have known about that Blue Mountains thing, but I've conveniently forgotten it, Rosie.
It works,
You've done well.
yes.
Yes, it does
Canberra.
work. Yeah. And with that voice of the future speaking to us, I think we'll conclude this session, and I'd ask you to join in giving our panellists a round of applause.